The dashboard clock read 7:43 a.m. when Officer Sarah Mitchell turned her patrol car onto Maple Drive, raindrops dancing across her windshield in the gray morning light, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. Black, 2 sugars, a habit inherited from her father, who'd worn the same badge for 26 years in this very city. Unit 247, we've got a suspicious person report at the Oakwood Mall. Dispatch crackled through her radio. Sarah's hand hovered over the receiver, but something caught her eye in the empty parking lot of First National Bank. A man in a charcoal suit, easily worth a month of her salary, paced beside a sleek BMW, his polished shoes splashing through puddles. Even from 50 yards away, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his watch and running his hands over his close-cropped hair. The flat tire on his car sat like a deflated dream against the wet asphalt. Unit 247, do you copy? Dispatch called again. Sarah watched the man make another call, his free hand gesturing in frustration. She'd seen this scene play out differently 100 times in her 10 years on the force. Usually, she'd run the plates first, call for backup, follow the protocol drilled into her since academy days. Her partner Blake's voice echoed in her head. Never trust a situation at first glance, Mitchell. That's how you end up being a cautionary tale at next year's training. Unit 247 responding, she finally said. There's a situation at First National that requires my attention. Route Oakwood Mall to Unit 233. The man, she'd later learn his name was Marcus Thompson, didn't notice her cruise into the parking lot. He was too busy leaving what seemed like his 20th voicemail. This is Marcus Thompson again. Please, I need to speak to someone about my father's condition. He's in room 205, and his voice caught, the kind of crack that only comes from a soul stretched too thin. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon as she stepped out of the cruiser, raindrops immediately dotting her uniform. Academy training dies hard. But then Marcus turned, and she saw something that stopped her cold. Not fear of her badge or her authority, but the pure, naked fear of a man watching his world slip away minute by minute. His phone screen lit up. 47 missed calls from Dad's nursing home. And beneath that, a calendar reminder that made Sarah's breath catch. Final or VP position. Dad's last chance. Sir, she called out, her voice carrying over the rain. Is everything all right? Marcus straightened, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for what experience had taught him to expect. Officer, I can explain. But Sarah was already seeing beyond the scene in front of her. She was 16 again, finding her father collapsed in their kitchen after working 3 straight shifts, trying to keep their family afloat after her mother's death. She saw the same desperate determination in Marcus's eyes. Her radio crackled again. Blake's voice this time. Mitchell, you need backup at First National. Sarah looked at Marcus, at the flat tire, at the phone still buzzing with calls from the nursing home, and made a decision that would ripple through both their lives in ways neither could imagine. Negative, she responded, already moving toward the BMW. Just a flat tire. She clicked off her radio and addressed Marcus directly. You look like you're having one hell of a morning. Sir, mind if I help? The surprise that flickered across his face was followed by something rarer and more valuable, a glimmer of hope. Neither of them knew it then, but that moment, in a rain-soaked parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday morning, would become the first line in a story that would change not only their lives but their entire community. Thunder rolled in the distance as Sarah Mitchell, daughter of a cop who'd served with unwavering dedication, prepared to break her first departmental protocol of the day. Sometimes, she would later reflect, the most important moments of our lives arrive disguised as simple choices in the rain. Sarah's boots squeaked against the wet pavement as she approached the BMW, her reflection fragmenting across its rain-streaked surface. 10 years of police work had taught her to read people like books, but Marcus Thompson was rewriting her assumptions with every passing second. I'm already late for the most important interview of my life, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands as he checked his phone again. Another missed call from the nursing home flashed across the screen. And now my father, he's having one of his episodes. He forgets where he is when they happen, starts talking about his old patrol days. Patrol days. Sarah's hand, which had been instinctively hovering near her weapon, dropped to her side. Marcus nodded, rainwater running down his face like tears. 28 years on the force in Memphis. He was one of the first black officers there in the 70s, used to tell me stories about. His phone buzzed again, and the professional facade cracked just slightly. "I'm sorry, Officer Mitchell. I don't mean to dump all this on you." Sarah glanced at his tire, then at her pristine uniform. Policy dictated she should call roadside assistance and move on. Instead, she found herself shrugging off her rain jacket. "Your father was a cop," she said, laying the jacket on the ground. "That makes us family, in a way. Let me take a look at that tire." As she knelt beside the flat, Marcus's confusion was palpable. "Officer, you don't have to." "Sarah," she corrected, already loosening the lug nuts. "And I know I don't have to. Tell me about this interview while we work." Marcus hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside her, his expensive suit collecting rain and road grime. Vice President of Operations at Meridian Healthcare. They manage dozens of nursing homes across the state. His voice caught. "Including my father's. With this position, I could finally move him somewhere better, somewhere with more specialized memory care." A crack of thunder punctuated his words, and Sarah saw him flinch, not from the sound but from another call lighting up his phone screen. She recognized the nursing home's number now. "How long until your interview?" she asked, working faster. 30 minutes. Downtown." Marcus laughed humorlessly. "Impossible in this traffic, even if we fix this right now." Sarah stood, her uniform soaked and smudged with tire residue. She studied Marcus Thompson. Really studied him. She saw the wedding ring tan line on his finger, the worry lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the way he kept glancing at his phone like a lifeline to his father. Department policy flashed through her mind. No civilian escorts except in emergencies, no personal involvement in civilian matters, maintain professional distance at all times. Breaking these rules could cost her the badge she'd worked so hard to earn. Then she remembered her own father's words from years ago. "The badge means nothing if we forget the humanity it protects." "Mr. Thompson," she said, reaching for her cruiser keys, "I'm about to offer you a choice, and I need you to understand something first. I'm breaking about 6 different regulations by even considering this, but sometimes regulations and right don't align perfectly." Marcus stood, confusion evident on his face. "I can escort you downtown with lights and sirens, get you to that interview on time," she continued. "Or I can go check on your father personally while you handle the interview. Either way, I'm calling my contact at Pete's Towing to handle this tire properly." The look that crossed Marcus's face, disbelief mixed with a fragile hope, made her chest tight. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would you risk your job for a stranger?" Sarah thought about her father working himself to exhaustion, about sacrifice and duty, and what it really meant to protect and serve. "Because 11 years ago, I was working a double shift when my father had his heart attack. A black officer named James Wilson stayed with him in the hospital for 6 hours until I could get there. Never knew him before that day, never saw him again. He just said, 'We take care of our own.'" Lightning split the sky as Marcus Thompson made his choice, a choice that would set in motion events neither of them could predict, rippling out to touch lives far beyond that rain-soaked morning in a bank parking lot. The patrol car's lights painted the gray morning in alternating flashes of red and blue as Sarah guided it through rain-slicked streets. In the passenger seat, Marcus Thompson sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the phone in his lap. No new calls from the nursing home in the last 10 minutes. "Small mercies." "Your father," Sarah said, deftly maneuvering through traffic that parted before her like the Red Sea. "You said he has episodes. Does he still think he's on patrol when they happen? Marcus's fingers tightened around his phone. Sometimes he's convinced he's back in 76, working a beat in Memphis. Last week, he tried to report to roll call. The nurses had to convince him he wasn't late for his shift. A sad smile touched his lips. Other times, he's crystal clear, sharp as ever. Yesterday, he beat me at chess in 12 moves. Sarah took a corner faster than regulation allowed, her mind spinning with the decision she'd made. She'd called Pete's Towing for the BM boat and texted her confidant, Nurse Jackie, at Evergreen Care Center. If anyone could help her navigate this situation without raising official flags, it was Jackie. "Tell me about the position," Sarah prompted, partly to distract Marcus from another incoming call, partly because she found herself genuinely invested. "VP of Operations. That's quite a jump." "It's everything I've worked for," Marcus replied, straightening his rain-spotted tie. 15 years, starting as an orderly during college, working up through administration. This position, it's not just about the better care I could get for Dad. It's about changing the whole system, making it work for families like ours. Sarah caught the ours in his statement, wondered if he'd noticed it too. "What would you change first?" "The isolation," he answered without hesitation. "These places, even the good ones, they become islands. Residents lose connection with the community. Their worlds shrink to 4 walls and a TV." His voice grew animated, passion breaking through the worry. "I've got plans for community integration programs, partnerships with local schools, police departments." The radio crackled. "Unit 247. What's your 20? Got a situation developing at 5th and Main." Sarah's heart hammered as she reached for the radio. Lying to dispatch was a career ender. Unit 247. Escorting a civilian witness downtown for an urgent statement. Not entirely false. Marcus was civilian, and he would be making statements, just not to the police. The rain was easing as they approached the gleaming Meridian Healthcare building. Sarah pulled into the drop-off zone, lights still flashing, creating an unintentionally grand entrance that drew eyes from the lobby. 15 minutes to spare, she said, checking the time. Then, more quietly, "I'll head to Evergreen now. Jackie, my nurse friend. She'll help me check on your father without raising any red flags." Marcus turned to her, conflict evident in his expression. "Officer Mitchell." "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you. This is so far beyond." "Just nail the interview," she interrupted, then added with a slight smile, "and maybe don't mention the police escort in your first week if you get the job." As Marcus reached for the door handle, Sarah made another impulse decision. She pulled out her card and scribbled her personal number on the back. "Text me when you're done. Let me know how it went, and I'll update you about your father." Marcus stared at the card for a long moment before carefully tucking it into his wallet. As he straightened his suit and prepared to step into the next chapter of his life, he paused. "My father would say what you're doing goes beyond the badge. It's about humanity." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Sarah replied. "Now go change the system." She watched him stride into the building, back straight, head high, looking every inch the executive he was meant to be. Then she pulled away from the curb, already composing the text to Jackie, knowing she was tumbling down a rabbit hole of broken protocols and crossed boundaries. But as she navigated toward Evergreen Care Center, Sarah realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was doing more than enforcing the law. She was serving in the way she'd dreamed of when she'd first pinned on her badge, with her heart as much as her duty. The rain had stopped completely now, and patches of blue were breaking through the clouds. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the brightest moments come right after breaking the rules. Evergreen Care Center smelled of antiseptic and yesterday's meatloaf when Sarah stepped through its automatic doors. Nurse Jackie met her at the reception desk, concern etched across her familiar face. "Room 205, Jackie whispered, falling into step beside Sarah. "He's been asking for his service weapon all morning." Keeps insisting there's a situation at Riverside Park that requires immediate backup. She paused, glancing at Sarah's uniform. Maybe seeing another officer will help ground him. Sarah's radio crackled with static. She should have been back on patrol 20 minutes ago. Another rule broken. Another line crossed. The weight of her choices pressed against her chest, like a bulletproof vest worn too tight. They found Harold Thompson standing at his window, ramrod straight despite his 83 years, eyes fixed on something only he could see. He turned at their entrance, and Sarah's breath caught. Even clouded by confusion, his eyes held the unmistakable authority of a veteran officer. Officer Mitchell reporting. "Sir," she said, reading the situation and falling into a respectful stance. "I understand you have concerns about Riverside Park." Harold's posture shifted subtly, decades of police training responding to the familiar protocol. "White female suspect," he reported crisply, then hesitated. Or was it? Confusion flickered across his face like static on an old TV screen. "Sir, would you mind if we reviewed the situation over chess?" Sarah gestured to the board set up by his window. "I find it helps organize the facts." Something cleared in Harold's expression. "Chess," he repeated, then smiled. "Marcus and I played yesterday. He still can't defend against the Sicilian defense." Sarah helped him settle into his chair, noting how his hands, though trembling, moved the pieces with practiced precision. As they played, Harold's timeline gradually shifted from 1976 Memphis to present day, his stories weaving between past and present like threads in a complex tapestry. "Had a partner once," he said, capturing Sarah's night. "White guy named Sullivan. First week, he wouldn't even ride in the same car with me. By our second year, he took a bullet meant for me during a robbery." Harold's eyes focused sharply on Sarah. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest choices. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Interview over. Went well. How's Dad?" As she typed a quick response, Harold studied her face. "You remind me of a rookie I trained. Same look in your eyes, like you're always weighing duty against conscience." Before Sarah could respond, her radio erupted. "All units be advised. Video circulating on social media shows Officer Mitchell assisting and escorting a civilian this morning. Captain requests immediate." Sarah's heart plummeted. Someone must have recorded her helping Marcus, shared it online. Her fingers gripped the chess piece she'd been about to move. Harold sat straighter, years of command presence emerging through the fog of age. "Young lady," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I believe you're about to face some questions about your actions today." "Yes, sir," Sarah whispered. "Then let me tell you what I told every rookie who ever rode with me. The badge is a symbol of authority, but it's your humanity that makes you worthy to wear it." He moved his queen with deliberate precision. "Checkmate in 3 moves, by the way." Sarah's phone lit up again, this time with a message from Marcus. "Got the job. Coming to see Dad now. Everything okay?" As if on cue, Captain Rivera's name flashed on her radio display. The storm she'd been brewing all morning was about to break. But looking at Harold Thompson, a living piece of police history, a man who'd broken bigger barriers than she could imagine, Sarah felt her spine straighten. "Sir," she said to Harold, standing, "would you be willing to come to the precinct with me? I think there are some people who need to hear your perspective on community policing." Harold's eyes sparkled with a familiar light, the same determination she'd seen in Marcus's eyes that morning. "Officer Mitchell," he said, rising with dignity, "I believe it's time to show them how the old guard handled things." He glanced at the chessboard with a slight smile. "After you let me finish winning this game, of course." Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds completely, casting long shadows across the care center's parking lot. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the darkest moments come right before the real change begins. The precinct buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah walked through the door, Harold Thompson at her side. Officers stopped mid-conversation, paperwork forgotten in hands, coffee cups frozen halfway to lips. Harold moved with the measured confidence of someone who'd walked similar halls for decades, his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the linoleum. Captain Rivera waited in his office, a laptop open before him showing a viral video of Sarah changing Marcus's tire. 3 million views and climbing. "Officer Mitchell," Rivera began, then stopped short at the sight of Harold. Something flickered across the captain's face. Recognition, then disbelief. "Harold Thompson, Memphis PD, 76 to 98. Harold's grip tightened on his cane. "The same. Though I'm surprised you'd remember an old case from another jurisdiction." "Remember?" Rivera stood, his disciplinary demeanor cracking. "Sir, every cadet at the academy studied the Thompson-Sullivan partnership. Your work in Memphis revolutionized community policing. You and Sullivan." "Jim Sullivan," Harold interrupted, his voice softening. "Best partner I ever had, once he got past his own prejudices. Took a bullet for me in '83. He turned to Sarah. The same year my partner's daughter lost her mother. Jim helped her through it, watched her grow up dreaming of wearing the badge herself. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. What did you say?" Harold's eyes, clear as morning light, fixed on her. "Sarah Mitchell, Jim Sullivan's daughter. I recognized your name this morning, but the fog, it comes and goes. Your father never told you about me, did he?" The office fell silent except for the soft whir of the laptop fan and the distant ringing of phones. Sarah's mind raced through childhood memories, her father's stories about his old partner, the mysterious officer who'd saved his life, the reason he'd joined the Memphis PD in the first place. "All this time," she whispered, "Marcus is my son," Harold finished, "and you're Jim Sullivan's daughter. Now here you are, helping each other without even knowing the connection. Life has a way of coming full circle." Captain Rivera sank back into his chair, the viral video forgotten. "Officer Mitchell wasn't just breaking protocol this morning," Harold continued. "She was honoring a legacy she didn't even know she carried. The same legacy Jim and I tried to build, one of service above suspicion, humanity above habit." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus stood there, still in his interview suit, confusion playing across his features as he took in the scene. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted in the bullpen. Officer Blake burst in, waving his phone. "Captain, you need to see this. Meridian Healthcare just posted about their new VP of Operations. They're calling it a momentous step forward in community relations. The stories everywhere. Black executive, white officer, father's legacy. It's trending nationwide." Marcus stepped fully into the office, his presence filling the space. "I got the position," he said quietly. "But there's something else. I just found out Meridian's planning to close 3 care facilities, including Evergreen, cost-cutting measures they didn't mention in the interview." Sarah watched Harold's face tighten, thought of all the residents who would be displaced, the communities that would be disrupted. Without thinking, she spoke up. Unless someone with inside influence could propose an alternative. Marcus met her gaze, understanding dawning. Someone with a viral platform and a proven commitment to community building. Someone, Harold added, his voice strong with purpose, who understands that real change requires both authority and compassion. He looked between his son and Sarah, just like another partnership did, 40 years ago. Captain Rivera stood again, looking at the viral video still playing silently on his laptop. "Officer Mitchell, your actions this morning violated several protocols." He paused, then smiled slightly, and reminded us why those protocols sometimes need to be challenged. "I believe we have an opportunity here." Sarah felt the weight of the moment, the convergence of past and present, the unexpected connections, the doors opening before them. Her father had always said that true police work wasn't about enforcing laws but building bridges. Looking at Marcus Thompson, at Harold, at her captain, she realized she was standing on one such bridge right now. Sometimes the greatest revelations come not from what we discover, but from what we've known all along without recognizing it. 3 weeks after Marcus took his position at Meridian Healthcare, a shooting rocked their fragile progress. Officer down to Washington, a black officer with 12 years of service, fired 3 shots at Craig Miller, a white college student, during what should have been a routine traffic stop. The dash cam footage was inconclusive, the body cam mysteriously malfunctioned, and the city held its breath. Sarah stared at her phone as the notifications poured in. Protesters were already gathering downtown, some supporting Washington, others calling for his arrest. The familiar battle lines were being drawn, but this time, everything was reversed. It's different when the script gets flipped, isn't it? Harold observed from his new private room at Evergreen, the chessboard between them untouched. Marcus had leveraged his position to halt the facility closures temporarily, but bigger battles loomed. Makes people question their automatic responses. Sarah's radio crackled with reports of growing crowds. Officer Washington was my mentor at the academy, she said quietly. He's the most by-the-book cop I know. This doesn't make sense. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Emergency board meeting about the shooting. They're worried about liability with our community policing initiative. Need you here? Harold studied the chessboard, moving a pawn with deliberate precision. When I was a rookie, my training officer told me something I never forgot. He said, "Thompson, the truth isn't black and white. It's written in shades of gray, and sometimes the darkest shade holds the light we need." Sarah's mind raced back to the dash cam footage she'd reviewed. Something about Miller's movements, the way Washington had reacted. "I need to see that traffic stop location," she said suddenly, standing. "Something's not adding up." "Go," Harold urged. "But remember, in times like these, people don't want facts as much as they want confirmation of what they already believe." The scene of the shooting was cordoned off, but yellow evidence markers still dotted the ground. Sarah ducked under the tape, her flashlight beam cutting through the gathering dusk. The official report said Miller had reached for his waistband, but the angle of Washington's cruise had blocked the camera's view. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus had sent a photo of the boardroom, suits, and stern faces. The caption read, "They're voting to suspend all community initiatives. Say it's too volatile right now." Sarah swept her light across the pavement, then stopped. There, barely visible in the fading light, skid marks that didn't match either vehicle's position. A third car had been there. Her radio burst to life. Downtown crowds were swelling, chants filling the air. Black officers were being called traitors. White officers, conspirators. The careful bridges they'd been building were burning. "Officer Mitchell." Captain Rivera's voice, tense. "I need you downtown. The situation's escalating." Sarah looked at the skid marks again, then at her phone showing Marcus in that boardroom, fighting to save programs that could prevent future nights like this. She thought of Harold, who'd faced impossible choices in his own time, and of Officer Washington, alone in an interrogation room. "Captain," she responded, "I need 1 hour. I think I found something." She opened her messages, creating a group chat with Marcus, Harold, and Captain Rivera. "The shooting," she typed. "I don't think it was about race at all. But somebody wants us to think it is." The evidence was there. The mysterious skid marks, Washington's perfect record, Miller's odd behavior. A staged confrontation designed to ignite existing tensions, to prove that initiatives like theirs were doomed to fail. Her phone lit up with responses. "Harold, sometimes the biggest lies are the ones we're most ready to believe." Marcus, "Board's about to vote. What do you need?" Captain Rivera, 1 hour, Mitchell. Make it count." Sarah looked toward downtown, where years of mistrust were threatening to explode. Then she looked at her phone, at the small group of people who'd learned to see beyond their assumptions. Sometimes the hardest storms to weather are the ones we create ourselves. She pressed the radio button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 247. I need Officer Washington's complete patrol logs for the past month, and someone get me Craig Miller's phone records. The truth might be written in shades of gray, But Sarah Mitchell had learned to read between the lines. Now she just had to hope the city would listen before it tore itself apart. The truth, when it finally emerged, hit like a thunderbolt at midnight. Sarah stood before the hastily assembled press conference, her evidence laid out with the precision of a prosecutor. Behind her, Marcus and Harold sat alongside Captain Rivera, a united front that crossed every divide their city had ever known. Craig Miller, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the tense crowd, was never the target. Neither was Officer Washington. They were pawns in a larger game. She gestured to the projection screen where surveillance footage played. This was orchestrated by individuals who profit from division. Private prison contractors who stood to lose millions if Meridian Healthcare's community policing initiatives succeeded. The footage showed a third car, the missing piece that changed everything. Miller had been paid to provoke the incident, while Washington had genuinely feared for his life, because a hidden gunman had been aiming at both of them. The real target, the very concept of unity they'd been building. But they made one crucial mistake, Marcus added, stepping forward. They underestimated the power of truth and the strength of a community that's learned to look deeper than surface appearances. Harold rose from his chair, leaning on his cane but standing tall. 40 years ago, his voice commanded attention despite its age. My partner and I faced those who said change was impossible. They were wrong then. They're wrong now. The room erupted with questions, but Sarah's attention caught on a face in the crowd, Officer Washington's wife, tears streaming down her face as the truth vindicated her husband. Beside her stood Miller, shame-faced but present, ready to testify about how he'd been manipulated. The board's decision, Sarah whispered to Marcus as cameras flashed. Unanimous support, he murmured back. They've doubled the funding for community initiatives. Sometimes people just need to see what they're fighting for and against. Later that night, in Harold's room at Evergreen, the three of them sat around the chessboard that had become their unofficial meeting place. The pieces stood untouched as they watched the city heal on the evening news. You know what this means, Harold said, his eyes twinkling with that familiar light. The real work begins now. Sarah nodded, thinking of the morning she'd stopped to help change a tire. We've got community leaders asking to implement similar programs in their cities, she said. The governor called about taking it statewide. And Meridian's board wants to establish a foundation, Marcus added, straightening his tie, a habit he hadn't lost despite his new authority. They're calling it the Thompson-Sullivan Initiative for Community Unity. Harold's hand trembled slightly as he finally moved a chess piece. Your fathers would be proud, he said softly. Jim Sullivan, and I dreamed of this, a world where the badge builds bridges instead of walls. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Rivera. Washington cleared for duty. Wants to join the community outreach team. Says he learned something about assumptions. You know, Marcus mused, studying the chessboard. When you pulled over that morning, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. Funny how life's biggest blessings often come disguised as our greatest fears. Sarah watched Harold set up the pieces for a new game, his movements deliberate and sure. The fog that had clouded his mind seemed to lift more with each passing day, as if purpose were the best medicine of all. Dad, Marcus said suddenly, tell her about Memphis. About the day you and Sullivan really became partners. Harold's eyes met Sarah's, decades of history bridging the space between them. It was a day much like the one you faced, he began, when everyone expected us to be enemies, but we chose to be something else entirely. As Harold's story unfolded, Sarah glanced out the window at their city. Not perfect, not completely healed, but moving forward. Sometimes the strongest bridges are built in the aftermath of storms, constructed from the very materials meant to divide us. She turned back to the chess game, to this unlikely family she'd found, and moved her first piece. The real victory, she realized, wasn't in changing policies or exposing conspiracies. It was in changing hearts, one small choice at a time. 1 year later, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of the newly established Thompson-Sullivan Community Center, formerly the Evergreen Care Center's West Wing. The autumn morning mirrored that fateful day when she'd first met Marcus, only now the sun shone brilliantly, casting long shadows across the gathering crowd. "I never liked speeches," Harold commented from his wheelchair beside her, his dress uniform pressed and medals gleaming. At 94, he'd insisted on wearing it today. "Still don't, but some moments demand words." Marcus emerged from the center, surrounded by a group of cadets, both police and community members, who'd just completed the first Thompson-Sullivan leadership program. His suit was even nicer than the one he'd worn that rainy morning, but his smile was the same, full of hope and determination. "Officer Mitchell," one of the cadets called out. "A young woman named Tanya Williams. Can you tell us again about the morning that started all this?" Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus and Harold. The story had become legend in their city, but today it felt especially poignant. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "Let me tell it." Officer Washington stepped forward, his new position as Community Relations Director evident in his confident stance. "But first, I want to share something we just discovered in the archives." He held up a yellowed photograph. In it, 2 young officers, one black, one white, stood beside a police cruiser, both grinning despite the obvious tension of the era. The date stamp read 1976. "Harold Thompson and Jim Sullivan," Washington explained. "Taken the morning after they broke up the Richardson gang. The case that proved integrated patrols could work." He paused, letting the significance sink in. And in Officer Sullivan's pocket, barely visible, a photo of his daughter, Sarah, age 3. Sarah felt her throat tighten as she studied the image. Her father, forever frozen in time with Harold, neither of them knowing their children would complete the circle they'd started. The ceremony itself was brief but powerful. The Thompson-Sullivan Community Center would serve as both a senior care facility and a training ground for a new kind of law enforcement, one built on understanding and connection rather than authority and force. "My father," Marcus addressed the crowd, his voice carrying across the morning air, "taught me that true change doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from small choices, made moment by moment, to see beyond our assumptions." He glanced at Sarah. "Sometimes it comes from stopping to help change a tire." Harold insisted on standing for his part, leaning on his cane but straight-backed as ever. 48 years ago, my partner took a bullet meant for me. Today, his daughter carries forward the shield we tried to forge, one that protects through understanding rather than force." As the ribbon-cutting approached, Sarah noticed a group of residents from the care center watching from their windows. Among them was Mrs. Sullivan, Jim's widow, her mother's best friend, recently moved in under Marcus's personal supervision. The connections kept weaving tighter, healing old wounds, building new bridges. "Ready?" Marcus asked, holding out the ceremonial scissors. Sarah shook her head. "I think this honor belongs to someone else." She turned to Harold. "Officer Thompson, would you do us the honor?" Harold's hands trembled slightly as he took the scissors, but his voice was firm. "To the future," he declared, "built on foundations of the past." The ribbon fell, and with it, the last barrier between what was and what could be. Later, in Harold's room, now featuring a wall of photographs documenting their journey, they gathered for their traditional chess game. Sarah's daughter, 6 months old, and named Joy Sullivan Mitchell, slept peacefully in Marcus's arms while Harold set up the pieces. "You know," Harold mused, "Jim used to say that chess is like life. It's not about the pieces you move, but the spaces you create for others to move into." He looked at his son, at Sarah, at little Joy. "I think he'd be proud of the space we've created." Sarah watched the sunset paint the room in shades of gold, thinking of that rainy morning that had changed everything. Sometimes the greatest journeys start with the smallest steps. Sometimes a flat tire leads to a revolution of the heart. "Your move," Harold said softly, and Sarah smiled, knowing he meant far more than just chess. After all, Every ending is just another beginning in disguise.